It was supposed to be her moment. One ceremony, one title. The same title every heir's daughter had received since 1953. But when Princess Charlotte walked into the room, her name was missing. And standing in her place was Camilla's granddaughter, wearing the sash, holding the ribbon, and smiling for cameras that had been told this was already approved. No one said a word. Not the aides, not the press, not even the palace. Until the royal guard stepped forward. Not with fury and not with drama, just a controlled act of protocol enforcement. That stopped Camilla in her tracks. Now, before we show you how far she went to erase a royal child and the fallout she never expected to face, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Tap like, hit subscribe, and make sure the bell icon is turned on. Because this wasn't a mistake, it was a replacement, and the guard confronted it head on. The Heritage Archive Pavilion wasn't the most grand of Windsor's halls, but it carried a distinct reverence. Sandstone pillars, arched windows, and a single chandelier borrowed from St. George's drawing room. Most people mistook it for a quiet museum annex, but to those in uniform, it was where traditions were quietly handed down. And today, the Crown was preparing to bestow one of those traditions, the title of Young Royal Patron of Children's Literacy. Sergeant Harlan Bryce stood just inside the western threshold, shoulders squared, rifle vertical, the tall black bearskin hat of the Coldstream Guard crowning his stillness. The doors were not yet open to press, but aides moved briskly between rows of seats and floral stands, adjusting nameplates and testing microphone levels. Bryce's job was not to interfere, but observe. And it was during that quiet half hour before ceremony that he noticed it. A thick printed programme placed on a brass easel at the entrance bore the event's order. Line 4 read clearly, "Young Patron Presentation, Maya Astor." Bryce's eyes scanned the line again, not out of confusion, but calculation. Because this title, ceremonial though it may be, had always been handed down the same way. Since 1953, it had passed directly from heir to heir, each child of the future monarch receiving it in a quiet public gesture around their 8th or 9th birthday. Princess Charlotte of Wales was 9. Maya Astor was not just younger, she wasn't even in the line of succession. Bryce's fingers didn't move, but a small pressure formed at the hinge of his jaw. He tracked the movement of aides from the Office of Public Education. 2 looked tense. One leaned toward the floral coordinator and whispered, "Is this change final?" The reply came back flat and low. "Came through this morning from the consort's cipher." Another aide muttered, "It was never cleared through Kensington." Bryce kept his eyes on the room. Charlotte and the Princess of Wales had not yet arrived. That, at least, was still expected. But the guest of honour was already here. Maya Astor, escorted by a Kensington staffer who shouldn't have been assigned to her. The girl was cheerful, oblivious, clutching a red leather booklet. Then came the sound of hard-soled heels. Camilla. The Queen Consort entered not with press nor with royal liaison, but alone, flanked only by her 2 most senior aides. She carried a folio with ornate gold trim, not the seal of the crown, nor Buckingham. It was her personal cipher. Bryce had seen it before, during a disputed delegation reshuffle last spring. She approached the front row, surveyed the layout, and tapped one of her aides. "Let's remove that extra seat," she said. "There's no need to crowd the frame." Bryce watched as the seat beside the podium, the one that, by all precedent, belonged to Princess Charlotte, was quietly wheeled away. Nothing in his posture changed. But behind the stillness of his uniform, something old and exacting had just awakened. And while no rule had been broken yet, the pattern was beginning to form. He kept his gaze forward, 4 paces from the aisle, 2 from the sovereign's seal, still silent, still watching. Camilla did not pause for formalities. She rarely did when arriving ahead of cameras. Her coat, deep charcoal with subtle burgundy piping, fanned behind her as she walked briskly toward the centre aisle of the Heritage Archive Pavilion, speaking low to the aide on her left. Neither carried the official folder of protocol clearance, neither stopped to acknowledge the stage coordinator or the royal press secretary waiting by the East Arch. Sergeant Harlan Bryce didn't turn his head. He didn't need to. His line of sight, motionless under the tall black bearskin hat, absorbed every micro-behaviour he'd served under interior observation rotations for 3 years. He knew the difference between confident planning and covert adjustment. Camilla walked straight to the front row. There were 4 nameplates arranged neatly on the polished oak chairs. One for the education minister, one for Princess Charlotte, one for Catherine, and one for the young patron. Until this morning, those last 2 had always been the same person. But now, Camilla gave a nod. Her aide stepped forward and lifted the nameplate reading Princess Charlotte of Wales, traditional patron's successor. A second aide, almost on reflex, slid a new one into place. Maya Astor, patron désigné. Bryce saw it happen in real time. The ease, the speed, the practiced choreography of a decision that had been made long before this morning. One of the aides leaned in slightly toward the stage manager and said, "It's been adjusted. This is the final version. Use the new designation when prompted." The stage manager blinked. "Did this clear through Kensington?" The aide offered a polite, clipped smile. "It's been cleared. Please proceed as instructed." There was no further debate. Then came the second move. Camilla surveyed the seating again, then made a small motion toward the side. "Can we move that second row chair?" she asked, gesturing toward Charlotte's original position. "Let's give the cameras a bit more depth. Don't want clutter in the frame." It was a photographer's trick, but Bryce knew better. The seat being moved wasn't random. It was the only chair that had been linked, in every iteration of the programme, to Charlotte's symbolic place in the ceremony. As the staff shifted it back, a young girl entered through the northern corridor. Maya Astor, dressed in a soft mauve dress and white gloves, smiling shyly and escorted by Camilla's staff. She wore a sash, royal patron, children's literacy, stitched in gold thread, not yet announced, not yet formally granted, but worn nonetheless. It had not come from the Crown Wardrobe Office. Bryce clocked every stitch. The aides weren't nervous. That was what told him this wasn't a proposal. It was a plan already in motion, one step away from being irreversible. They entered with the kind of grace that didn't need fanfare. No trumpets, no staff procession, just a mother and daughter stepping through the west corridor like they had done so many times before. Princess Catherine, poised in a muted pastel blue coat dress with pearl buttons, offered a brief nod to the gathered guests as she walked. One hand resting lightly on her daughter's back, Charlotte walked beside her in matching tones. The hem of her pleated skirt falling just below her knees, her posture straight, every movement rehearsed but unforced. She had been raised for days like this, but even at 9 years old, she could feel the difference in the air. They reached the front row, and the hesitation came instantly. Charlotte's gaze swept the seats. Her name wasn't there. She didn't frown, didn't pout. She simply blinked once, then looked again. Her place had been beside her mother. Now it was gone. In its place sat a card that read Maya Astor, patron désigné, and 1 row back, a single chair had been discreetly added with no nameplate at all. She looked up at her mother. Catherine followed her eyes. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers curled slightly around the clutch in her hand. She leaned toward the nearest aide and whispered, "Has the order changed?" The aide didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked toward the stage, then toward Camilla, who now stood speaking with a press coordinator as if nothing had shifted. After a beat, the aide replied in a tone that barely made sound. There was a late adjustment. It came directly from the consort's office. Catherine said nothing. She simply guided Charlotte to the second row and took her own seat, back straight, hands folded. From his post, Sergeant Harlan Bryce caught it all, the glance from Charlotte, the quiet ask, the non-answer, the lowering of a child's eyes, not in defeat, but confusion. A form of humiliation that didn't sting, but hollowed. Camilla approached a moment later, her heels clicking softly across the marble. Her expression was overly bright. Her voice dipped in the performance of warmth. "Isn't Maya looking just lovely today?" she said aloud, not quite to Catherine, not quite to Charlotte. "She's our new little leader, so full of promise." Maya beamed. She curtsied too fast and too low, overcoached. Camilla's hand rested briefly on Maya's shoulder, presenting her forward as if she were a prize. Charlotte stood quietly, lips pressed together. She didn't flinch. But she looked toward Bryce, not in desperation, not in appeal, but in something harder to name, as if to say, "This doesn't feel right, does it?" Bryce didn't return the gaze directly, but he did one thing only a trained eye would notice. He shifted his stance, just half an inch, placing the toe of his left boot in line with Charlotte's aisle. Protective, not reactive, and Catherine saw it. She said nothing, but her eyes briefly met Bryce's beneath the shadow of his bearskin hat. And in that single glance the guard understood, noted, but not yet. When the press doors opened, the room transformed. What had been a quiet, pre-event shuffle now gave way to the clicks and low whirs of camera shutters. A red velvet rope had been drawn to separate the back 3 rows from the front. Not standard for an education patronage event, but no one questioned it aloud. The photographers took position in the southern alcove. Behind them, aides adjusted their posture, checked cue cards, and whispered final directions through earpieces. At the front, Camilla stepped up to the carved lectern. She moved slowly, ceremonially, as if she were about to bestow a state honour, not announce an honorary youth patron. Her hands rested lightly on the folio in front of her, the gold-embossed cipher catching the light as she opened the first page. "Good morning to all our educators, partners, and future visionaries," she began. Her voice had the precise lift of polished delivery, familiar to those who had seen her open garden parties and briefings, but the language this time was curated. As we look toward a modern crown, one that reflects not only the traditions we've inherited, but the inclusivity we aspire toward, we must ask ourselves, who are we raising to carry the torch? A few nods from the front row. Polite, expected. Sergeant Harlan Bryce stood motionless beside the eastern archway, watching Camilla more than listening to her. Every sentence so far had been a deflection, polished language that avoided what everyone in the room had noticed. There was no mention of Charlotte, no acknowledgement of the girl who had been the expected recipient of this symbolic title for over a year. The press pack had received early guidance, photographs of Charlotte with children's books, mock headlines like "Princess Picks Her Pages," all quietly approved by Kensington. And now, it was as if none of it had ever existed. Camilla continued, flipping to the next page with deliberate calm. "This morning it gives me great joy to introduce someone new, someone with a deep love of reading, a fresh voice, and a face not often seen at the centre of royal circles, but whose presence, I believe, reflects the openness this next chapter requires." She looked up, directly at the cameras. "Maya Astor will be stepping forward today as our new young patron of children's literacy." There it was, said out loud, on record, under cameras. With no co-signature from Kensington, no appearance of the Sovereign's office, no contextual disclaimer that this was honorary and non-binding. Charlotte sat perfectly still in the second row, her small hands folded over her lap. Her face betrayed nothing, but Bryce noted the slight tightening at her jaw. A child's dignity is often quiet. It doesn't lash out, it holds. Catherine didn't blink. She watched Camilla deliver the next paragraph about diversity of lineage and widening the circle of opportunity with the same look she used during state visits, composed, elegant, and utterly unreadable. But Bryce! He felt his instincts switch. This was not just symbolic overreach. This was substitution, and not even subtle. Camilla didn't hesitate. No transition, no deference, no ceremonial call to rise, just a brief tilt of her head and a small wave of her gloved fingers toward the second row. "Maya, darling, come!" The girl stood at once, clearly rehearsed, and took careful steps toward the stage, flanked by a palisade with a velvet-lined presentation box. The cameras re-centered as she reached the lectern, standing beside Camilla like a newly crowned heir. She smiled, curtsied again, too deeply. Camilla gently corrected her posture with a whisper and a hand on the shoulder. Then came the box. It opened with an audible click. Inside, a custom sash of navy satin, its ends finished with hand-stitched gold fringe. The words embroidered in curling gold script left no ambiguity. Royal patron. Children's literacy. The crowd gave polite applause, unsure whether to stand. Most didn't. The etiquette was unclear. Even for a royal announcement, this had veered into strange territory. A crossover of public gesture and private appointment, held together only by Camilla's authority in the moment. Camilla took the sash and looped it slowly over Maya's shoulder, adjusting it as if preparing for a photograph that would be framed and issued to every schoolhouse in the kingdom. "There," she said softly into the microphone, her voice honeyed. "Our newest face of literacy, a proud moment." The cameras clicked. Press lenses zoomed. Staff photographers repositioned. The sash shimmered under the stage lights. But in the second row, Charlotte sat frozen. She didn't cry. She didn't shift in her seat. She simply looked down. Sergeant Bryce saw it. Not the defeat, but the effort it took not to show it. Charlotte's fingers folded tighter into her lap. Her heels lifted off the floor for just a moment, then settled again. Silent grounding. The posture of a child raised to hold the line no matter what. Then a stage assistant leaned over toward Catherine and spoke in an ill-advised whisper. "Would you mind if the princess stepped aside slightly, just to keep the visual clean in the back frame?" Catherine's gaze slid toward him with glacier clarity. Before she could reply, Bryce shifted, just half a step, enough to interrupt the aide's proximity and make clear that no further request would be entertained. Catherine said nothing, but her hand moved, gently, deliberately, to Charlotte's shoulder, not to remove her, to anchor her. The child's chin lifted half an inch in response. Camilla continued her speech, spinning platitudes about reading, inspiration, legacy. But Bryce wasn't listening anymore, because every line, every sash, every staged flash, every seated snub pointed to one quiet truth. There had been no sovereign approval. There had been no sign-off from the heir's office. There had been no institutional clearance. This was a symbolic title handed down by tradition, not policy, but the protocol surrounding it was understood. For 70 years, this patronage had passed from monarch to heir's child, never to a cousin, a friend, or a favoured relative, especially not to one without standing. The sash meant nothing on its own. But if it made the papers, if it went unchallenged, if Kensington didn't act, the symbolism would ossify into accepted reality. And Bryce had seen what happened when symbols, left unchecked, became rewritten history. He lowered his gaze back to Charlotte. She looked small beneath the chandeliers, but she wasn't broken. Not yet. And as far as Bryce was concerned, not ever. Camilla motioned for Maya to step forward. A cluster of reporters stood ready before the ceremonial bookshelf. A photo installation meant to showcase the Crown's long-standing support for children's literacy. Rows of vintage hardbacks lined the polished oak shelves, each spine embossed with a small royal seal. Behind it, the Windsor crest had been projected onto the wall in soft gold lighting. It was carefully curated, a staged background for a staged appointment. "Right there, darling," Camilla murmured, her hand hovering over Maya's back as she nudged the girl into place. "Just smile, shoulders back." Maya adjusted the sash, holding the hem with both hands, the gold embroidery gleaming in the overhead lights. The lead photographer lifted his camera. "Hold for a moment," he said. And that was when it happened. A voice rang out, clear, even. "Mom," not loud, just enough to stop the room. The sound didn't echo, but it rippled, the way only authority could when delivered with restraint. Dozens of heads turned at once. Sergeant Harlan Bryce hadn't moved from his post. He stood tall, shoulders squared beneath the scarlet tunic, rifle upright, tall black bearskin hat casting a shadow over his brow, but his voice had cut through the air like a page being turned mid-sentence. Camilla's hand froze mid-gesture. "Excuse me." Bryce didn't raise his volume. He didn't waver. "That patronage," he said slowly, "cannot be transferred without the sovereign's authorization." A beat of silence. Then absolute stillness. The photographers lowered their lenses. Aides stopped whispering. Even Maya seemed to sense something was wrong, her hands dropping from the sash. Camilla turned her full body toward Bryce, eyes narrowing. "You are not cleared to speak." Bryce remained motionless. "I speak," he said, "under Article 7.4 of the Hereditary Ceremony Safeguards, in service of a title that predates your office." Camilla's jaw stiffened. "You are out of line?" Bryce didn't blink. "I am upholding the Crown's hereditary designations, not personal appointments." No one moved. No one dared. From the second row, Charlotte turned her head slowly toward him. There was no confusion in her eyes now, only a quiet question, a child's version of, "Is this really happening?" And more importantly, did someone finally say it out loud? Catherine hadn't shifted an inch, but Bryce could feel her gaze too, locked on him, not in shock, not in protest, in recognition. Camilla stepped forward once, the hem of her coat grazing the edge of the dais. "Sergeant Bryce," she said through her teeth, "you will step down immediately." Bryce lowered his chin by the slightest fraction. Not a bow. A refusal. "This title belongs to the direct lineage of the heir. Any substitute is void on record." He said it like scripture, not rebellion, correction. And in that moment the entire hall understood. The sash wasn't the story anymore. The guard was. He didn't storm in. He didn't need to. The double doors near the archivist's alcove parted with quiet efficiency, and Prince William entered like a blade into silk, silent, sharp, unmistakable. Sergeant Bryce didn't glance, but he registered the shift immediately, the angle of the aides' shoulders, the way two press photographers lowered their lenses mid-frame, the instinctive hush that rolled across the rows. William wore no sash, no medals. Just a dark navy suit with a small crest pin on the lapel, the informal uniform of royal command done quietly. Camilla froze mid-step. Her fingers lingered on the back of Maya's sash, as if she could somehow shield the act with posture alone. William's eyes swept the room once, then fixed on the folio resting on the lectern, the one bearing Camilla's cipher, not Buckingham's. He didn't ask questions, he simply said, "Let me see it." The aide beside Camilla hesitated, but she passed the folio forward. William opened it without ceremony. His hands moved quickly, turning through glossy pages with mock press captions. Maya Astor, Crown's youngest literary ambassador, draft media blurbs, prepared remarks, even a mock-up school outreach campaign. Read like a royal. And at the centre of it all, a logo stitched with Camilla's outreach office insignia. Not once did he see the sovereign's seal. Not once did he see Kensington's joint approval. Not once did he see Charlotte's name. When he looked up, the temperature of the entire room dropped. "This appointment," he said flatly, "is invalid." Camilla straightened. "It's honorary, symbolic, nothing formal." William cut her off with a single look. Not rage, not even disapproval, just finality. "You replaced my daughter," he said, voice quiet but flint-edged. Camilla's breath caught. "She's had plenty of—" "This isn't about attention," William said. "This is about order, and what you just did was neither symbolic nor modern." A long pause. Charlotte hadn't moved in her seat, but her eyes, for the first time all morning, lifted toward her father. William didn't smile. He didn't reassure. He simply placed the folio on the edge of the lectern, carefully, as if returning evidence. Then he turned to Sergeant Bryce. "Protocol!" Bryce didn't hesitate. No appointment of a hereditary role may be redirected without the sovereign's signature or the heir's consent. The event is documented. The sash has been issued. The cameras recorded the transfer, but without clearance, he paused, it is illegitimate. William gave a single nod. Understood. Camilla opened her mouth again, searching for justification, for language, for anything that could neutralize the moment. But nothing came. Because the one thing she had gambled on, no one stopping her, had just evaporated. The South Chamber wasn't large. It wasn't meant for press or performance or public ritual. Just a dark walnut table, 2 arched windows, half drawn with silk drapes, and a single oil portrait of Queen Mary watching over the room. A place for hard truths, or quiet orders, depending on who occupied the chairs. Camilla stood at the far end, arms crossed tightly, the now infamous folio closed in front of her like a sealed verdict. Her shoes clicked once against the stone floor as she adjusted her stance, waiting for someone else to break the silence. Across the table, Prince William remained standing. To his left, Princess Catherine sat beside Charlotte, both quiet, composed. Catherine's hands rested gently on her daughter's shoulder. Charlotte said nothing, but her presence in the room said everything. Sergeant Bryce stood behind them, posture straight, gloves folded over his belt, expression unreadable beneath the lingering echo of what he'd just done in front of half the press corps. And beside him, a protocol officer from the Sovereign's Council turned over the final page of a regulation binder and said flatly, "There is no precedent for this title to be handed to anyone outside the heir's direct line, not honorary, not shared, not temporarily reassigned. The record will show a breach." Camilla's lips parted and cracked. "She already gets everything," she muttered. "The public, the papers, the comparisons to the Queen, they hang on to her every photo like it's prophecy." No one interrupted, so she went on. "She's 9 years old and they already call her the future. Maya doesn't get that. My grandchildren never do. They're good, they're kind, and no one even learns their names." William's jaw locked. "This isn't about names," he said. Camilla's voice rose. "You think it's about a sash? A seat? It's about what's been taken from us. From me. From mine. You've all built this dynasty with mirrors. So don't be surprised when I try to adjust the reflection." Catherine's gaze lifted. Not sharp, but solid. "You tried to write our daughter out of her own lineage." Camilla scoffed. "She's not losing anything. It's a formality." William stepped forward, slow, deliberate. "You didn't ask. You didn't propose. You presented it as complete. That's not symbolic. That's calculated." Camilla's hands trembled slightly. "I was correcting an imbalance." Sergeant Bryce's voice came quietly behind her. "You attempted to bypass royal protocol and reassign a hereditary title, ma'am, and you did so using only your outreach cipher, not the Crown's. Not Kensington's, not the Sovereign's. It wasn't accusation. It was conclusion." Camilla looked around the room then, as if someone might still come to her defence, as if a justification might still be accepted if only she could land it in the right key. But the silence that followed was different than before. It wasn't shock, it was judgment, and it was final. William didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply turned to the protocol officer and said, "Strike the patronage entry from today's event record. Nullify the assignment under all ceremonial logs." The officer nodded. "Understood, sir." Camilla let out a slow breath. Not relief, but restraint. There was a moment, brief and flickering, where she looked ready to argue again, but nothing came. Not with the binder closed, not with the guard still standing behind her. And not with Charlotte sitting silently across the room watching, not as a child shamed, but as a daughter restored. William gestured toward the unopened comms packet on the table. "A public clarification will go out this evening," he said, "from Kensington, not Clarence House. It will state that no patronage has changed hands and that today's photographs were taken without institutional approval." He looked directly at Camilla. "There will be no outreach campaign, no use of the logo, no forwarding of media assets to any schools. Any further attempt to circulate material under this title will be interpreted as intentional misrepresentation of Crown lineage." Camilla said nothing. No, it was the kind of silence that had less to do with dignity and everything to do with calculation. Her posture remained composed, but her fingers pressed hard against the sides of her coat, wrinkling the fabric. For all her talk of visibility, she now shrank into the edges of the room. William shifted his attention to Bryce. "Sergeant, your statement today? Did it breach formation protocol?" Bryce answered calmly. "I remained in post. My voice was projected under Section 3.6, verbal intervention permitted under live record circumstances where protocol deviation results in public procedural misclassification." William paused, then looked at the protocol officer. "Any breach?" "None," the man replied. Bryce gave a short nod, neither proud nor deferential. "Then, as of now," William said, "you are reassigned. Direct detail to Princess Charlotte on all literacy patronage engagements. Informal and formal." Charlotte turned her head, eyes wide, not in surprise, but in the slow realization of what that meant. Her posture shifted slightly forward in her chair, not to speak, but to listen harder. Beside her, Catherine's hand rested gently over hers. "You'll have someone with you," she said softly. "Someone who remembers what was right." Across the room, Camilla still hadn't moved. The folio lay untouched on the table, its seal now meaningless. A symbol without sanction, ambition without legacy. William didn't look at her again. He simply opened the chamber door. The guard held it. And Charlotte stood to walk through first. The wind had picked up by late afternoon. It wasn't strong, just enough to lift the edge of Princess Charlotte's coat as she stepped onto the flagstones of the west terrace, hands tucked neatly into her pockets. The grey sky pressed low over Windsor, its light casting the castle in a cold silver sheen. Behind her, the fountains had been shut off for the day. Only the soft drip of water from marble basins echoed against the stone. Sergeant Harlan Bryce followed 4 paces behind. No rifle, no crowd. Just the same steady footsteps he had kept all morning. Silent, protective, precise. Charlotte didn't speak at first. She walked to the edge of the terrace, where the hedges framed the gravel path down to the private gardens. For a long moment, she stood perfectly still, facing the horizon, not fidgeting, not sighing, just present. Then, finally, her voice, quiet, flat, but clear. "Was I supposed to lose that title today?" Bryce stopped walking. He didn't kneel, he didn't crouch. He simply lowered himself slightly, enough to meet her gaze without looking down. "No," he said gently. "Someone tried to take what was already yours." Charlotte looked at him, really looked at him, as if weighing whether the words were comfort or truth, and finding only truth. She nodded, once. Then she turned and kept walking, this time toward the far colonnade that led to the reading pavilion, the one named in her great-grandmother's memory. Her coat hem fluttered again, brushing lightly across the toe of Bryce's boot as she passed him. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to, because that light brush, that small instinctive contact, was how children of legacy say, "I know you're there." And Bryce? He resumed pace behind her. 4 paces back, not ceremonial, protective. The sash may have been printed. The speeches may have been given. The cameras may have flashed, but the record would show the truth. And as long as she walked in front of him, spine straight, coat trailing, title intact, that would be enough. For the institution and for him. Should a royal child ever be replaced, even symbolically? Was Camilla out of line, appointing her own granddaughter? And did the guard do the right thing by speaking during the ceremony? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. If you believe legacy should be protected, not rebranded, tap the like button, hit subscribe, and make sure the bell icon is turned on. Then share this video with someone who still thinks titles can be quietly stolen. And while you're here, our next Royal Guard story is already on your screen. Click it now, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, with a brand new video.